It is June the 7th, 2022, and our reading today in the book of Job is in chapter 24. Why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days? Men move boundary stones, they pasture flocks they have stolen. They drive away the orphan's donkey and take the widow's ox in pledge. They thrust the needy from the path and force all the poor of the land into hiding. Like wild donkeys in the desert, the poor go about their labor of foraging food. The wasteland provides food for their children. They gather fodder in the fields and glean in the vineyards of the wicked. Lacking clothes, they spend the night naked. They've nothing to cover themselves in the cold. They're drenched by mountain rains and hug the rocks for lack of shelter. The fatherless child is snatched from the breast. The infant of the poor is seized for a debt. Lacking clothes, they go about naked. They carry the sheaves, but still go hungry. They crush olives among the terraces. They tread the wine presses, yet suffer thirst. The groans of the dying rise from the city, and the souls of the wounded cry out for help. But God charges no one with wrongdoing. There are those who rebel against the light and do not know its ways or stay in its paths. When daylight is gone, the murderer rises up and kills the poor and needy. In the night, he steals forth like a thief. The eye of the adulterer watches for dusk. He thinks no one will see me, and he keeps his face concealed. In the dark, men break into houses, but by day they shut themselves in. They want nothing to do with the light. For all of them, deep darkness is their morning. They make friends with the terrors of darkness. Yet they are foam on the surface of the water. Their portion of the land is cursed, so that no one goes to the vineyards. As heat and drought snatch away the melted snow, so the grave snatches away those who have sinned. The womb forgets them, the worm feasts on them. Evil men are no longer remembered, but are broken like a tree. They prey on the barren and childless woman, and to the widow show no kindness. But God drags away the mighty by his power. Though they become established, they have no assurance of life. He may let them rest in a feeling of security, but his eyes are on their ways. For a little while they're exalted, and then they are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like all others. They are cut off like heads of grain. If this is not so, who can prove me false and reduce my words to nothing? Amen. Well, we saw in chapter 23, the theme there was the vindication or the justification of the righteous. And Job is yearning for that, pleading for that. And in a sense, he's expressing that. It was very personal, and he was speaking about himself and his own relationship, that right relationship with God. But now in chapter 24, we did say this last time, he moves now from that theme, that very positive theme, to the dark and difficult and negative theme of the punishment of the wicked. It is actually something we should rejoice in when you think about it. And the book of Job, it seems to me, as I've been reading it and looking at it again recently and been surprised by this, has got more to say about judgment, the judgment of the wicked, the nature of hell, than perhaps any other book in the Bible. It's one of the reasons why we really need it, especially in the day in which we live. And one of the reasons why this judgment must happen, why it's absolutely necessary, Job says, when you think of the victims of injustice. Part of wickedness is injustice. and there are always victims, verses 1 to 12. Now, this section begins with a question crying out. Why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days? I don't know whether Job really means that, whether he's asking the question for effect. By the end of the chapter, we'll see that he really does believe in, he really does know that there is a day of judgment coming. But anyway, the question is a provocative one, and it's crying out for God to come and to bring his justice and to deal with this fallen world. When you think of the crimes that are committed, verses 2 to 4, taking advantage of the orphans and the widows, the reference to the poor in verse 4. We've seen this so often in the book of Job, and here it is again many times in this chapter. The crimes committed against, verses 5 to 8, these people who are the victims. Look how they're described: like wild donkeys in the desert. The poor, there they are again, go about their labor of foraging food. And we have one example of, after another, of these people who have ended up destitute because of the selfish greed of what we would call today the super rich. It seems to spiral down and down. By verse 9, the fatherless child is snatched from the breast. The infant of the poor is seized for a debt. Children given away into some kind of slavery. At the end of this section, the end of verse 12, Job says, echoing verse 1, but God charges no one with wrongdoing. Well, he does. And one day we'll see that very clearly. But I think what Job must be saying is God charges no one with wrongdoing right now. And I wish he did. Please, Lord, come and sort out this terrible mess. It's a way of praying as we pray in the New Testament. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There is an element of that happening now. There is an element of God bringing forms of justice and punishment upon the wicked now. But of course, many get away with it, and many enjoy a lifestyle of rejecting God and oppressing people. They get away with it for a little while. I think that's what he's saying, and we can all sympathize with that and join in with that feeling, I think. Another reason why the wicked must be punished, ultimately, verses 13 to 17, when you think of the way that they reverse the order of creation. It's a very interesting little passage, this, in which light and darkness alternate, and the way in which the wicked reject the light and they hide in the darkness. The opposite of what is normal, the opposite of the order of creation. They subvert that, they transform that, they pervert that. So murder, burglary, adultery, they're all mentioned in this section. They all take place, of course, in the darkness. Verse 16. But by day they shut themselves in, they want nothing to do with the light. But then look at verse 17. There's a hint, isn't there, of something not going to go well for them. For all of them, deep darkness is their mourning. And then look at this. They make friends with the terrors of darkness, whether that's a reference to a guilty conscience, terrible nightmares, memories that come back to haunt people who've committed these awful crimes. That itself, sin itself, is a punishment. When it goes unpunished, it still does terrible things, not only to them out there, but to me in here. But then verses 18 to 25, he does come to a settled conclusion on the matter, that there will certainly be judgment against the wicked in the end. We have these terrible images of judgment, yet they are foam on the surface of the water. Their portion of the land is cursed, and so on. It might be at this point, it's not absolutely clear, it might be because this is giving the impression that the wicked are punished in the here and now, immediately, as it were. It might be that Job doesn't really believe that. He might well be quoting his friends, because that's how they take it, don't they? In their very superficial, legalistic way of looking at the world, a sort of moralistic framework. There are the good guys and the bad guys, and the bad people like you, Job, you're being punished right now for what you've done in your life. And that's how God's judgment comes. Well, it's not like that at all. The good sometimes find themselves caught up in a fallen world and the judgment upon a fallen world. And the wicked often are free, and they get off scot-free, and they're having a great time. So maybe in a few of these verses here, he's actually quoting these people and he doesn't agree with them. That's debatable, but that might be the case. But there's no doubting, verse 21, the wickedness, the cruelty, the ugliness of sin. Particularly these people, it says, verse 21, they prey on the barren and childless woman, and to the widow show no kindness. And there's no doubting that even if they get away with that in this life, they will not ultimately, verse 22, but God drags away the mighty by his power. Oh yes, verse 23, he may let them rest in a feeling of security. That goes against what those friends of Job have been saying, that God would somehow, turn a blind eye or look away or not bring immediate punishment. Well, that's obviously the case. Look at the world. But, verse 23, his eyes are on their ways. There's no escape. For a little while they are exalted, and then they are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like all others. They're cut off like heads of grain. That judgment is coming. Doesn't look like it in this life. There are the mafia bosses, there are the corrupt politicians, there are the celebrity pedophiles, there's the corruptions in the priesthood, etc., etc., etc. Not everybody gets their comeuppance in this life, not in this life, but ultimately they will for sure in the life to come. Ultimate judgment is inescapable. That's what Job says here in his own unique way, with a tremendous insight into these issues that perhaps we don't get like this anywhere else in the Bible. That's why we need the book of Job. This is what Job says, but this is also, in a rather different way, what Paul says, especially in the early chapters of the book of Romans, where he deals with the theme of the reality of judgment, God's judgment upon sin and idolatry. This is a vital plank in the foundation of the presentation of the gospel. And if we want to understand the gospel, we've got to get this point crystal clear in our minds. For example, in a verse like Romans chapter 2 and verse 5, but because of your stubbornness, and your unrepentant heart. You are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed. In verse 6, God will give to each person according to what he has done.